Meetings with difficult questions. Celibacy, Vocations and Sexual Scandals, Part 2. Hello, my name is Father Max. I am a foreigner, so if I'm too straightforward or not politically correct, please have mercy on me. I really don't want to offend anybody. It is not my intention. I just want to be 100% genuine. Please be aware that all the quotes are being marked with this reverb effect. Also, I give my consent to share this talk, to publish it, or to quote it to everybody. And in order to orient what's going on here, please do check part 1, called Controversial Celibacy. Please forgive my poor English, and let's begin. So, among the Catholics, there is a very strong belief that the main determinant which keeps young men from going to seminary is obviously celibacy. We have an army of youngsters dreaming of becoming a priest, but at the same time, they dream about the marriage. Also, it is obvious for everybody that obligatory celibacy, which the Church demands from the candidates to the priesthood, eventually leads to the great number of sexual crimes committed by the clergy. Who would argue? It is because the Church is not brave enough that this evident reform hasn't been done yet. How long have we screamed? Vocation crisis has reached a threatening scale already, the same with sexual crimes. But the Church, for the ununderstandable reason, remains deaf and blind. Does she? Let's explore. We will begin with the vocations. During my session about the celibacy, I claimed that cancelling it would not help to increase the number of vocations, and this was the argument. Now all the Greek Catholics as well as Orthodox seminaries are empty, as well as ours. So if Greek Catholic seminaries are empty, why do you think they will be full when we cancel celibacy? Of course, we can remember Church of England, where there is no obligatory celibacy, but they all have problems with their vocations. And so my question remains, why do we think that if in all other churches it doesn't help, it will help in our church? I admit that there could be a wave, first wave. Now we have our diocese, I believe we have 4 seminarians, we will have 8 if we cancel celibacy. After 5 years, 10 years, it will drop. The issue of vocations during our discussion was raised several times. I believe it is because I didn't convince people with my argument. The stereotype that celibacy is the main barrier which deters people from choosing priesthood is too strong among the Catholics. Unfortunately, too many people believe in a magic bullet and simple solutions. I decided to go deeper into the matter. So, there are 2 questions here. First, what is the cause of vocation crisis? And second, which I really do like, does the lack of vocation mean that God stopped calling people? If we open Wikipedia, the article called Priest Shortage in the Catholic Church, in the section Causes, the very first point is clerical celibacy. We read there, in 1985, Dean Hodge conducted a survey of Catholic college students and determined that celibacy was the most significant deterrent keeping men from entering the priesthood in the Latin Church. Hodge estimated that if celibacy were optional for the diocesan priests, there would be 4 times the number of men entering the priesthood. Bingo! Yeah, the magic bullet has been found! It's a great example why we shouldn't trust Wikipedia entirely and always check the sources. So thank God there is a link to this survey. We open it and read. Make celibacy optional for the diocesan priests. In 1985, I conducted a survey of Catholic college students and found the celibacy requirement to be the single biggest deterrent keeping men from entering the priesthood. If celibacy were optional for the diocesan priests, there would be an estimated 4-fold increase in seminarians and the priest shortage would be over. That's it. No more details about this survey. And this is absolutely ridiculous. How many respondents were there? 50? 20? 10? He said, I conducted a survey of Catholic college students. Who were the respondents? All males or females as well? How many of them were married or were in romantic relationships? Of course, when you are married already, the celibacy is the most significant barrier. Again, once your student love is over, you won't consider celibacy as a problem, rather in opposite. Next, what about the methods of the survey? Was it a questionnaire, or you simply asked your students during the lesson? when all the girlfriends were observing the respondents? Did they know who is conducting the survey, or it was done secretly? Knowing that you are doing it, knowing your views, namely that you ardently support cancelling celibacy, in order to pass the exam, the students could easily amend their answers. Another mistake, or rather manipulation here, is conducting the survey at the university. Yes, Boston College is a university. They kept the name college for the historical reason. It is in the school a man makes a decision about his future. If you go to a university, you already made this decision. How silly it is to ask about priesthood those who didn't want to be priests. How stupid it is to ask students of the medicine what deterred them from becoming lawyers. The main reason is because they wanted to become doctors. It is that simple. Of course, if you ask them, they will mention what they didn't like in the lawyer's life. But will they abandon medical career if we make barrister's job more attractive? Even if some say yes, we know, to promise doesn't mean to marry. Let us also remember that priesthood is not only the matter of a choice or preference. First of all, it is the answer to the God's calling. How stupid it is to ask about priesthood those who haven't been called. Nothing surprising if people who haven't been called to the celibacy don't understand celibacy. Even Jesus warned about it, the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 19, verses 10 to 11. The disciples said to Jesus, "If that is how things are between husband and wife, it is advisable not to marry." But he replied, "It is not everyone who can accept what I have said, but only those to whom it is granted." Dean Hodge, who died in 2008, was an American professor of sociology, so he is a scientist and he was perfectly aware of the methodology of conducting and publishing surveys and what conclusions are scientifically relevant. But he had the impudence to apply the results of his survey among a dozen of American students to the whole planet, saying if celibacy were optional for diocesan priests, there would be an estimated fourfold increase in seminarians and the priest shortage would be over. He wants to convince us that the answers of a dozen Americans are applicable to the society in India, New Zealand, Congo, Vietnam, Ukraine and Poland. Does this survey, conducted 37 years ago, explain why India, Nigeria and other countries of Africa and Asia are experiencing now a boom of priestly vocations? Does this survey explain why Eastern Catholic churches, or for instance Church of England, where there is no obligatory celibacy, also suffer from the shortage of vocations? Okay, maybe this survey was conducted and published in a proper way, with all the required methodology, but it seems really strange why he didn't give us a link. I made every effort to find it, but I failed. This survey is quoted everywhere, but nobody gives a link. I am quite sure Hodge didn't publish it because he knew it was rubbish. So the only source we have, it is what I just read. And I read something like, "I won't show you any proofs, but trust me." At least I would like to know how many respondents took part in it and who they were. By the way, I believe some of the respondents died already. But you've got an idea. Some people can deliberately manipulate the data in order to push their own views. Anyway, with all responsibility, I claim Dean Hodge a manipulator, if not a charlatan. As a professor of sociology, he was fully aware his survey is rubbish. He asked students of just one college, a liberal one. The sampling here is absolutely not relevant. The sampling is nothing. So how could he apply this to the whole Catholic Church in all the continents? Here is the trick. The university is a place where the views and minds of students are being shaped. That's why the sample of respondents equals 0 and means nothing. In my seminary, we have been taught strictly that Thomism is the most appropriate philosophy for the Catholic Church. If you conducted a survey among us those days, what philosophy is the best, I have no doubts that you would reveal that more than 90% support Thomism. And then we extend this to the whole globe and make a conclusion that the same result we will get in all the universities, in all the countries in the world. So if we introduce Thomism as a main philosophical system in all the universities, we will get fourfold increase of the students. Sheer idiocy. But let us come back to the Wikipedia and read about other causes of the shortage of priests. Next cause is sexual abuse scandals. The exposure of sexual abuse committed by Catholic priests in various parts of the world tarnished the reputation of priests globally. This is theorized to have discouraged some men from pursuing the priesthood and contributed to the shortage. I have to admit this is partly true. It is very sad about all the sexual and other scandals, and it definitely has an impact on vocations. However, we know that the amount of sexual scandals is pretty much the same or even higher among the medical workers, for example. Why didn't this deter people from becoming doctors and nurses? This is not a rhetorical question. I would like to know the answer. I have never heard that doctor is no longer a respected job because of the sexual scandals. Who is responsible for this? Media? I think not only, but for sure to some extent. I've never read an article in a newspaper where a journalist would attack NHS as the organization just because Dr. X has been convicted of a sexual abuse. Next point in Wikipedia is socioeconomic expectations. It says, Sondra Jochum, a professor specializing in faith and culture at the University of Dayton, notes that in the past the priesthood carried a high prestige in Catholic culture. Having a son become a priest was once seen as a pinnacle of success for working-class Catholic families. But as socio-economic opportunities and expectations have risen in Western societies, a son joining the priesthood could be seen as diminishing the family's prosperity. I agree with this entirely. Of course, this is not the root of the problem, but it definitely has an impact. Maybe I will sound cynical, but I'm quite sure that if priests were generally richer, it would attract more people to the priesthood. Let me remind you, the married priest in England has £27,000 a year. It is less than average, it is less than a teacher has. If the celibacy were cancelled, do you think many young men will immediately go to a seminary considering the future of their children with this salary? The last point in Wikipedia I'd like to mention is the view of the Pope Benedict XVI, namely smaller family size. Pope Benedict, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, identified smaller family size and changing family priorities as the cause of the Catholic priest shortage, rather than priestly celibacy. If today the average number of children is 1.5, he reasoned, the question of possible priests takes on a very different role from what it was in ages when families were considerably larger. The main obstacle, he argued, was parents who have very different expectations for their children. It is difficult, if not impossible, to argue. He is 100% right. India and Nigeria, where there are generally large families, confirm this claim. However, in my opinion, this is not the complete truth. So let me finally answer what, again in my opinion, is the main cause of the actual crisis of vocations. The main cause is small number of children in the Catholic families and a catastrophic number of the lapsed Catholic among those children. An average Catholic family has just 1 or 2 children. 60% of them are girls. The rest, from among the boys, some will become doctors, lawyers, teachers, etc. Of course, the number of candidates to the priesthood is limited significantly only by the family size, just to start with. But why do our Catholics have just 1 child? Let me remind you of a solemn promise they gave to God during the rite of marriage. Are you prepared to accept children lovingly from God and to bring them up according to the law of Christ and His Church? The bridegroom and bride each say, I am. So what? But it's just the half of the problem. In the website faithsurvey.co.uk, where we can find the actual measuring the Catholic population, we read 7.1% of cradle Catholics attend Mass once a week or more, but 59.6% attend never or practically never. I don't want to be rude, so I won't ask you, my dear listener, about your own children. I will ask something different. How many boys in the age of 16 to 20 years old do you see in your parish? How many of them are altar servers? Let us remember, the vast majority of the seminarians were altar servers before. Why aren't they altar servers? Thus, we can easily answer the question, did God stop calling the people to the priesthood? The answer is, Who can he address this calling to? Where are they? The Catholic hierarchy lives in celibacy. The clergy don't give birth to the clergy. The priests don't fall from the moon, they don't ripe on trees like apples. They're coming from laity, from families, from the very concrete schools and countries. I mean from the very certain societies with their historical, cultural and other backgrounds. Before we blame the teaching or the discipline of the Church and demand quick and severe reforms, let us think what are the problems of the background a candidate is coming from. In fact, 18 years old young man spends in the church only 1 or 2 hours a week. Rest of his life he spends with his family and in the school. We won't be wrong if we say that it is family and the school which shape the faith and mind of a child, mostly. Let us keep in mind that the main factor of being called by God is a strong faith. The very vast majority of the seminarians come from the religiously strong families. It is difficult to expect that somebody who hasn't attended the church regularly will become a priest. Again, it is difficult to expect that a young man will come to the church regularly when his parents don't come. The very essence of the priesthood is deeply connected with sacraments in the Bible, especially sacraments of the Eucharist and penitence. It is very unlikely for somebody who is not interested in football to become a professional football player. That's why this is a basic image of a candidate to the priesthood. Young man around 20 years old who comes to Mass not only on Sundays but weekdays as well. Always by the altar, appreciating his altar serving, who reads the Bible and regularly comes to the sacrament of confessions. The very basic description of leading a bit deeper spiritual life. Now, how many of them do you know in your parish? But, as I said, families and schools mostly shape the faith and mindset of a child. So let us start with families first. As I said in the part 1 called Controversial Celibacy, only 52% of Catholic adults live in the sacrament of marriage. 34% of all the marriages experienced a divorce, and only 26% of this number have sought annulment from the Catholic Church. We can conclude that we are experiencing a deep family crisis in our Church. The weakness of their faith is obvious, but what it looks like among those families who are strong. Let me tell you a story. My brother, who is also a priest, once was in Germany. A devout lady came to him to say thank you for his priestly service. She said something like, "Father, your calling is just beautiful. You dedicated yourself entirely to the service of God and the Church. It is so inspiring, so amazing. We really do appreciate it, etc." My brother said, "Thank you, but would you like your son to be a priest?" Oh, no. This story tells us a lot. What are the family expectations the Pope Benedict was talking about? Do you want your son to be a priest or rather a lawyer, doctor or businessman? Why not a priest? Isn't it because even practicing Catholics agree it's not a respectful position in our society anymore? You might say, "I don't want him to be a priest because of celibacy. I want grandchildren." If you thought of it, you made me really sad. Did you think what God wants? Or you care only about your own desires and expectations? What if God wants him to be a priest? What if he calls him to the celibacy? Will you support your child in that case? Do you think your son doesn't know your opinion, even if he feels God's calling? It is very difficult to expect a boom of vocations in the society where Catholic parents don't want their own children to become priests. Eventually, if God calls your son to be a monk, where chastity is a nature of a monastic life, do we have to close all the monasteries in the world just because Christ's faithful want grandchildren? Or rather, like this lady from Germany, we think about priests and monks with a sympathy, but let somebody else's child goes there, not mine. Again, it would be very different if you had 4 or 5 children, isn't it? Let me also say a few words about the prayer for the vocations. I promise I will be 100% sincere. The question is, how many Catholic parents pray, "God, please call my child to the priesthood"? Or in case of a daughter, call her to the religious life. What would they prefer, Cambridge or seminary? Now we understand fully what the Pope Benedict meant by saying family expectations and what a great role it plays in vocation crisis. And try to look at the problem from God's point of view. He wants to call people. He is looking for the one to give him his absolutely invaluable gift of sharing in his priesthood, but instead he hears this: God, please give us priests, but not my child. I won't give it to you. Please put somebody else into trouble. It is not wise to play with God. He knows our heart perfectly. A bit earlier I touched the matter of altar service. This is important. In fact, if we look at the history, we will see it is super important. Over the centuries, it is exactly altar service that the church had all the vocations from. In the past, in order to become an altar server, you had to pay a huge price. The liturgy was very complicated, much complicated than nowadays, and you had to know it all very well. Most parts of the liturgy were celebrated in silence, a priest whispered. And it was the altar server only who was close to the priest, who heard the whisper and knew exactly what is going on. In addition, and it was the most difficult thing, he had to know all the answers by heart, and they all were in Latin. And some of the answers were long. There was a couple of psalms in Latin. And if something costs you a lot, you will always appreciate this. The more difficult your job is, the more respect you have. What is better, coffee for £1 or coffee for £1,000? The altar server was very close to the priest, to the altar, to the liturgy. He had a unique position. The altar server had a very special relation to the priest, liturgy and the church. In fact, in order to celebrate Mass, the priest had to have an altar server. Generally speaking, it was impossible to celebrate Mass without an altar server. If you think about it, you will discover with a surprise that the whole life of the church was dependent on lay altar servers, on these small boys. Without them, the life of the church stops. No Mass, no communion, no preaching. And of course, this super important liturgical role was reserved to the boys only. The priesthood is reserved for males only, and altar serving is reserved for males only. In that way, a very special relation was established between the altar serving and the priesthood itself. It was practically impossible to go to a seminary if you haven't been an altar server before. So it was very logical that after serving for years by the priest, the next step is seminary. I remember myself and my peer altar servers, while serving by the priest, we all ask ourselves about the vocation. Nowadays we've lost everything. Altar serving costs nothing, and everybody is very welcome, including girls. Please don't get me wrong, I am not sexist. Girls can be altar servers, and in fact they are generally speaking better at it than boys. It is obvious, again, I'm generalizing here a lot, but boys at school to some extent are always a bit hooligans. They want to make jokes, they tend to neglect obligations, etc. While the girls treat everything seriously, and they are diligent. I have facts to prove it. Girls get better marks at school than boys. Google it. You will see that even some scientific researches have been done to explain this phenomenon. The same with liturgy. Generally speaking, girls are better. But when we allowed girls to serve, the special relation between altar serving and priesthood was ruined. It definitely has a great influence on the vocation crisis. Look, in all the countries where girls are allowed to serve, there is lack of vocations. The countries where it is still unthinkable or even prohibited by the conferences of bishops, I am speaking about countries like Africa and Asia, they are fine. Coincidence? Once I spoke to one English priest who has a small parish. He regularly says an old Latin Mass there and personally prepares all his altar servers. 2 of them went to the seminary. If my memory serves me well, 3 or 2, let's say 2. 2, it is 200% more than some big 1,000 people parishes. Lay people who ask the church to allow girls to serve, did they think about the consequences? The beauty of the idea doesn't prove its authenticity. It makes me sad when people attracted by the false but beautiful idea fight ardently to push it forward, completely ignoring their reality. The real life is a real life. Not every beautiful idea works here. You want girls to serve at the altar? That's fine, I am not against it. But you will pay the price, closing and merging parishes. Of course, this is not the only reason, but it has an impact, and a significant one. This system worked for more than 500 years. In fact, it worked for more than 1000 years. Different people, different cultures, different mentalities, it worked. We have ruined it. Do you think it won't have any side effects? If you analyze altar serving in the history of the church, you won't underestimate the issue. And I have to admit, not many girls nowadays want to serve at the altar. It is coffee for 5p. Nobody wants it. What about secular society? I mean schools where your children spend half of their youth. Each time I pass by children in the town wearing a cassock, I see big, surprised eyes. This is what we call a secularization, namely the transformation of a society from close identification with religious values and institutions towards non-religious values and secular institutions. A priest is considered as something peculiar, strange to the normal society. Not many children want to be peculiar, don't they? Data from the annual British Social Attitude Survey and the biennial European Social Survey suggest that the proportion of Britons who identify as Christian fell from 55% in 1983 to 43% in 2015, while members of non-Christian religions, principally Muslims and Hindus, quadrupled. The non-religious now make up 53% of the British population. More than 6 in 10 nuns were brought up as Christians, mainly Anglican or Catholic. Christians are in minority now, and this also affects the number of vocations a lot. Other sociological tendencies and views about values also took part in the matter, for instance, homosexuality issue. The very recent survey among young American Catholics published by Robert David Sullivan in November 10, 2021 shows that over 40% pointed to abuse cases and the church position on homosexuality as significant reasons for their lack of involvement in parish life. Every Catholic child lives in two different societies, with sometimes different or even contradictory values, the Catholic society and the secular one. Catholic society teaches, as it is clearly written in the Bible, homosexuality is a moral disorder, while secular society is extremely strict, it is absolutely normal. No surprise, it is difficult for the children and causes confusions. It is a role of a family, first of all, to help a child, next the parish community and a local priest. But God, please spare us from the people, and all the more from the priests who would distort your gospel. If we distort it in order to meet the expectations of those who reject the gospel, I think it is about us, Jesus said in the gospel according to Luke 6th chapter. Alas for you when everyone speaks well of you. This was the way their ancestors treated the false prophets. And blessed are you when people hate you, drive you out, abuse you, denounce your name as criminal on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice when that day comes and dance for joy. Look, your reward will be great in heaven. This was the way their ancestors treated the prophets. Among different sociological tendencies which influence the vocation crisis, let me, for example, mention this one. We live in the society where young people are not able to make lifelong commitments. Not only young men. It might not be a problem for the young people to promise obedience, everyday prayer and celibacy for 5 years. But when it comes to lifelong promises, it is a big problem. The high rate of Catholic divorces confirms this point of view, because marriage, in the understanding of the 19th chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew, is also a lifelong pledge. Married or unmarried, the priesthood is a commitment for the whole life. It's not an occupation among many others which can be easily changed if something goes wrong. And it also has nothing to do with celibacy. In addition, I asked my brother what he thinks about the vocation crisis. He spent 8 years in Rome while doing PhD in canon law, where he met priests from all over the world. Also, he ministered as a priest in different countries, including Poland, Germany, England, Italy, etc. He spoke about the matter with different priests in different countries, so I say his experience is worth paying attention to. Among the most important reasons, he mentioned low social status of a priest in a modern society. Look, he said, at the African and Asian countries where there is a boom of vocations. A priest there has a very high social status, but not only status, let's say power, which also used to be the case 60 years ago in Ireland and other European countries. Of course, some of the priests abused their power, but that's a different story. Those days when somebody went to seminary, it was a great event for the whole parish. Not only seminarian himself, the family was respected immediately. The whole story was something great for the parish. Now we have completely opposite situation. A priest has a very low social position. When I say I am a priest, in most cases it causes nothing else but big surprised eyes and compassion. I think the family of a priest mostly experiences the same, big eyes and pity. Nowadays, a priest is widely criticized, not only outside the church, but inside the church as well. Being a priest means feeling guilty for everything, for the sexual abuse you've never done, for choosing the celibacy, for having money, for asking for the privacy, for making decisions in the parish, etc., etc. Just one example. If a doctor buys a Porsche car, it is a sign of his success in life, and he is respected even more. The parents are proud of him. When a priest buys a Porsche car, you know. During this my talk, lots of points about clergy have been made. Let me repeat some of them. The church must change a lot about clerics, celibacy is not right, the parish priest shouldn't decide about the parish goods, the clergy say they are the only ones who can minister in the church, so they try to usurp the power. Clergy alcoholics, clergy who betrayed their vow of celibacy and left the priesthood, and all these just during one meeting. I assume these themes every now and then are being discussed in families. Your son is sitting and listening. Who on earth will choose a position which is not attractive, not respectful, and widely criticized? And I keep hearing that the people want to deprive clergy of the last privileges which left, somehow. Let's push forward laity in the liturgical ministry. For instance, let them celebrate funerals, as it is the case in Germany. Let them lead expositions of the Blessed Sacrament and Holy Hours. Let them lead the liturgy of the Word with the Holy Communion, since they can. Let laity decide about the life of the parish, about the goods of the parish. Okay, what's left for a priest? Nothing but to comply with the decision of a group of old ladies, a parish council, as it is in some parishes in the Netherlands, for example. All these are nothing but killing the institution of priests. What do we want eventually? To overcome the vocations crisis, which means more priests, or we want to get rid of the priests whatsoever? I mentioned the Netherlands. Let me illustrate this. My very close friend, also Father Max, several years ago went to the Netherlands with a group of Ukrainian pilgrims who asked him to celebrate Holy Mass for them. He came to a local parish, met a priest and asked if he can celebrate Mass for the pilgrims. He answered, "I don't know, I can't make this kind of decisions. I even haven't got the key to the church. You have to ask a chairwoman of our parish council." Since she was working, they had to wait for a couple of hours. Eventually she came, and my Father Max asked her permission to celebrate Mass in the church. She kindly allowed. When they came in, some pilgrims asked for the confessions before the Mass. They found a confessional piled up with the old books and other rubbish. A chairwoman and other ladies from the parish council, who also came to control what is going on in their church, explained that the parish decided not to have confessions. Also, it has been decided that the parish council every week gives to the priest the theme for the homily they would like to hear next Sunday. They decide even what the parish priest is to preach about. Even more, each Mass they choose which chasuble he is to wear to celebrate Mass. Father Max also was given the chasuble by the parish council after a brief argument between the ladies. Also, there was a decoration on the altar, so the ladies strictly instructed Father Max which part of the altar he is to use. So a priest simply has to fulfill what he has been said. Would you like your son to be in this position? And as a result of all these brave reforms, here is the fact. In 3,785,000 of nominal Catholics in the Netherlands, there are only 38 diocesan seminarians in the whole country. And it will be wonderful if just a half of them will be ordained, which means 19 in 6 years, which is 3 priests a year, and it is an optimistic scenario. Also, according to the official statistics, the Catholic Church in the Netherlands has suffered an official membership loss of 650,000 members between 2003 and 2015. The number of people registered as Catholic in the Netherlands continues to decrease, roughly by 0.5% annually, which means 10% in 20 years. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the world's record. So when you think to deprive priests from the last privileges, please think twice. The day the Vatican hears to the calls of some people and gives authority of a parish into the hands of the parishioners, seminaries will die. I'd like to say I promised from that day on I would discourage every young man who would express desire to become priest, because simply I feel sorry for him, but there will be no need to do this. The parents will do it for me. They will make every possible effort to keep their dear children from this miserable position they themselves have built for the priests. And this also has nothing to do with the celibacy. As we can see, the crisis of vocations is a very complicated issue. Let me sum up a little bit of numbers from the website faithsurvey.co.uk. In England and Wales, weekly mass attendance has fallen by nearly a third, 30.7% between 1993 and 2010, as compared to corresponding falls of 10.9% in the Catholic population and 9.4% in the number of priests over the same period. Can you see correspondence here? In 1993, we had 1.28 million of Catholics in England and Wales. In 2010, 0.89 million. What is the reason? If a marriage has just one child, we have the situation where out of 2 Catholics over the years we have 1, and this one eventually leaves the church. Terrific number. Over the brief period of 17 years, more than 30% of Catholics stopped coming to the church every Sunday. Isn't it obvious that there is a causal relationship between decline in Catholics overall and decline in vocations? What does it have to do with the clergy celibacy? Do you really think that if the celibacy were cancelled, a great army of religiously ardent young teenagers will appear in our parishes out of nowhere? Again, India, Nigeria, Philippines and other countries show a growth in the Catholic practicing population and correspondingly the growth of priests. Priesthood numbers over the period from 2005 to 2014 in Africa was an increase of 32.6%, in Asia of 27.1% in priests. In Europe, the number declined by 8%. Here I try to show just the causes of the crisis. I'm not going to speak of how to overcome it, because it will last forever. It took me several months to prepare this talk with all the found data. Anyway, we can see a direction where to go to. Let us make our faith as strong as rock, and then our children will have the same faith. Let us be ardently faithful to the gospel, not distorting it to please the expectations of those who reject it. And let our families give birth. England is not a poor country. Among other things, there is a direct relation between using condoms and the number of priests. Now let's discuss the relation between the celibacy and pedophiles. There is a very strong picture, rooted quite deeply in our minds, that pretty much all the sexual crimes committed by clergy is a result of the celibacy. The connection seems to be obvious, doesn't it? During my talk I said, do you know which area of social life has the biggest number of pedophiles? Schools? Hospitals? Churches? No, families. And I made quite a strong claim. To say, if you are a celibate Catholic priest, you're more likely to be a pedophile. No, if you have children, statistically it's more likely for you to be a pedophile. So when we have married priests and families, probably it will increase number of cases. A little bit, but still. So celibacy and pedophiles has nothing to do in common. Okay, I'm pretty sure most of the people who support cancelling celibacy do so because they believe it will help to decrease the number of pedophile cases and increase the number of vocations. These two main reasons. So now let's discuss the relation between celibacy and pedophilia. A couple of facts. First of all, pedophilia is a psychiatric disorder in which an adult and older adolescent experiences a primary or exclusive sexual attraction to prepubescent children. This was taken from the book written by Sato Michael, Pedophilia and Sexual Offending Against Children, Washington, D.C. American Psychological Association, page 7, 2008. Next, approximately 30% of children who are sexually abused are abused by family members. This was taken from Finkelhor, D. Characteristics of Crimes Against Juveniles, Durham and H. Crimes Against Children Research Center, 2012. So I was right. If we put the family pedophilia cases and all others, but separately schools, separately nurseries, separately hospitals, etc., the family will be the most common. Even more, the younger the victim, the more likely it is that the abuser is a family member. Of those molesting a child under 6, 50% were family members. Family members also accounted for 23% of those abusing children ages 12 to 17. This was taken from Snyder and H. 2000, Sexual Assault of Young Children as Reported to Law Enforcement, Victim, Incident, and Offender Characteristic. Washington, D.C., U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, Bureau of Justice Statistics, retrieved January 12, 2009. Of course, I can't prove it, but I'm quite sure there are priests, pedophiles who never abuse children because of fear of being prosecuted or because it's too difficult, because of the safe environment we've created in parishes. But if they have a family, the opportunity is too close, it's just behind the wall in the room next to you. The temptation would be too close, too easy. So as I said, it's quite likely that cancelling celibacy will slightly increase the number of pedophiles. The Daily Mail online website published an article called How 1 in 7 pedophile suspects have jobs that could involve children in posts such as teaching, health, and the law. We read there, nearly 700 suspected pedophiles in Britain, including teachers, carers, and government officials, have been arrested over child abuse images in the past 9 months, shocking new figures reveal. Around 1 in 7 of those held was employed in or volunteered in a position of trust, with suspects working in the education, law enforcement, criminal justice, and government sectors. Others had jobs in the medical and care professions, while some served in armed forces. Those detained who held positions of trust include 32 in teaching and education, 23 in medical or care work, 15 in law enforcement, criminal justice, armed forces or government roles, 24 in volunteer positions. Of course, in the article, priests haven't been mentioned, because I assume the number is too low, if there is one. But we can learn another extremely crucial thing from this article. Most of the people mentioned here are married. Yes, most of pedophiles, if not to say almost all, are married or have a partner. Even if not, there are many ways to achieve a sexual relief without breaking the law and going to prison. Pedophilia is not about the sexual relief at all. It's about committing the crime, which a pedophile is almost always aware of. So it's about something which is very deeply rooted in the psychology of a pedophile, which makes him restless all the time, despite having sex or not. Let me say even more. Physiologically, celibacy is just a temporal sexual abstinence. The male's body is constructed in such a way that every now and then you have a sexual relief during night dreams. Make a research yourself about the causes of pedophilia. You will find that they are unknown, but although what causes pedophilia is not yet known, researchers began reporting a series of findings linking pedophilia with brain structure and function beginning in 2002. Among the different studies, we can find studies which found associations between pedophilia and lower IQs, several differences in MRI-detected brain structures in pedophiles, a study which using structural MRI indicating that male pedophiles have a lower volume of white matter than a control group, etc. But one thing we won't find, the link between pedophilia and sexual abstinence, because it's ridiculous. Santa Clara University website published an article written by Thomas Plante, PhD, Augustine Cardinal Bear, Professor, SCU Psychology Department. The version of this article was originally published by Psychology Today in August 23, 2018. The title is Separating Facts About Clergy Abuse from Fiction. We read there. The recent release of the Pennsylvania Grand Jury report on clergy sexual abuse in the Roman Catholic Church during the past 70 years has unleashed another round of headline news and, sadly, much misinformation about this critically important problem. No empirical data exists that suggests that Catholic clerics sexually abuse minors at a level higher than clerics from other religious traditions or from other groups of men who have ready access and power over children, for example, school teachers, coaches. The best available data reports that 4% of Catholic priests sexually violated a minor child during the last half of the 20th century, with a peak level of abuse being in the 1970s and dropping off dramatically by the early 80s. And in the recent Pennsylvania Grand Jury report, only 2 cases were reported in the past dozen years that were already known and dealt with by authorities. Thus, the Grand Jury report is about historical issues and not about current problems of active clerical abuse now. Putting clergy abuse in context, research from the US Department of Education found that about 5 to 7% of public school teachers engaged in a similar sexually abusive behavior with their students during a similar time frame. While no comprehensive studies have been conducted with most other religious traditions, a small-scale study that I was involved with found that 4% of Anglican priests had violated minors in Western Canada, and many reports have mentioned that clerical abuse of minors is common with other religious leaders and clerics as well. Clerical celibacy doesn't cause pedophilia and sexual crimes against minors. Think about it. If you can't or don't have sex with a consenting partner, would children become the object of your desire? Of course not. If anything, other consenting adults would. Additionally, if public school teachers have level of sexual victimization of their students at level higher than Catholic clerics during the same time frame, then one can't simply blame celibacy for the sexual abuse problem in the Catholic Church. Moreover, the vast majority of sex offenders are regular men, often married or partnered, with 80% or more victimization their own family members, with the most likely candidate being a stepfather or older brother abusing a child or teen in the home. And he is absolutely right. There is no relationship between sexual abstinence and developing a psychiatric disorder or a change of a sexual orientation. Return to the time of your youth, when you didn't have a sexual partner. Let me note, it is a time of the most active sexuality. Did this time of abstinence make you look at the children as sexual objects? Did it change your orientation? And just to conclude, let me repeat once again, according to the statistics, most of pedophiles are married or have a partner. Also, let me say a couple of words to those who think the Church demands a celibacy or forces candidates to take the vow. From the very beginning, everyone knows the Latin Church ordains only unmarried men. There are lots of requirements, this is one of them. Next, at the very moment of ordination, the Church asks, "Do you deliberately want to live in celibacy?" The candidate says yes. Where is coercion? A candidate had 6 years in seminary to think about it. If he feels violated, why does he say yes? Isn't it silly to lie while taking such an important vow? And if you know a situation where a candidate feels coerced, please speak to the bishop. But you have to know the facts. For instance, a candidate spoke to you openly about the matter. If you don't know, please do not assume. Do not try to put yourself in his shoes. If you have family, it is very likely you haven't been called to the celibacy and to the priesthood. Let me sum up this talk. As we saw, there is no relation between sexual abstinence and the psychiatric disorder of pedophilia. Not even one scientific survey would suggest the correspondence. So, to say the least, linking these two is against the science and the common sense. In my opinion, it's quite likely it might slightly increase the number of cases. Of course, I'd like to say in the church there must be zero tolerance to the sexual abuses and zero tolerance to the covering whatsoever. I am very glad to say a lot has been done to improve the situation. The main thing is to make every effort to create a safe environment in our parishes, so that even if, God spare us, there is a priest pedophile, it would be simply impossible for him to abuse a child. For instance, never close the door of the sacristy, where there are an altar server and a priest alone. The same with the confessional. Not because we don't trust a priest, but because we have nothing to hide. And because sometimes I feel vulnerable. We all know how easy children can fall in love with the teachers, for example, and what a great imagination they have. Also, imagine a 6-year-old girl surrounded by unfamiliar big adults who ask her very seriously, "Did Father Max touch you?" This very moment she doesn't think about the criminal law and the consequences of her answer. She is frightened. Her mother looks very anxious, which frightens her even more. She understands something wrong happened and she might be punished for it. She doesn't care about the truth. The only thing she thinks of is, what is the right answer, the answer which will help me to avoid the punishment? And if she lies saying yes, it's difficult to blame this little angel. But I am in a big trouble. So yes, when I am with the children, I want to be watched all the time. But the main thing, in that way, we create an environment where it is just impossible to abuse a child, even if somebody would like to. And as we heard the statistics of pedophiles, we know laity are not at all better than priests, with about 30% of all the pedophilia cases in families. So it applies also to lay Catholic pedophiles. There might be sexual abusers among our sacristians, catechists, leaders of the children's liturgy, extraordinary ministers of the Holy Communion, etc. What? Sorry? Sounds offending. Well, you've just been in clergy shoes. In an interview with Eugenio Scalfari, Pope Francis said that advisors in the church reassure him that the problem of clergy pedophiles amounts to about 2%. And if you were a careful listener, and I bet you were, you have to say here, "Hey Father, stop. Previously you said that the number of pedophiles among clergy is about 4%. Well spotted. It's an issue of great importance. The peak of sexual crimes among clergy was in 70s and 80s, 40 years ago. So when we reached the moral bottom, we had 4%. Pope Francis speaks about the actual situation, which is about 2%. Why is it so important? Because the problem is, so to speak, artificially overswollen. Most of the crimes are the crimes of the past. How many priests do you know who have been convicted for the recent crimes committed in the past 10 years? Here we go. Can we speak about an actual sexual abuse crisis? However, please don't get me wrong. In my opinion, 1% is too many. In fact, one sexual crime is too many and is not tolerable. But we live in the real life, and we can see that in the real life the number of pedophiles among clergy is, to say the very least, not higher than among the people in the society we live in. If we believe Pope Francis, the rate is in fact lower. 2 times lower, because even though the prevalence of pedophilia in the general population is not known, but it is estimated to be lower than 5% among adult men. This was taken from Sato MC Pedophilia Annual Review of Clinical Psychology, published in 2009. So the actual amount of pedophiles among clergy is about 2%. What about the rest, 98%? All the innocent priests have to listen again and again about sexual abuse crisis, clergy pedophiles, etc. And they have to feel guilty and sorry. But when a lay Catholic is put to prison for the same crime, nobody cares about his Catholic membership. I agree we have to be strict and demanding with regard to this extremely crucial matter. Zero tolerance, but we have to apply the same amount of strictness to all, not to clergy only. So we have to create a safe environment which will defend the happiest time of human beings, their childhood, the time they're completely defenseless. It belongs to us as adults, it is our responsibility to protect them. regarding the vocations. We could see that being a sociological phenomenon, it is dependent on hundreds of different sociological factors, which makes it a very complicated issue. We live in the real world where there are no magic bullets or simple solutions. We have learned the vocation crisis is not global. There are some areas, or rather continents, in the world where the church blossoms with the vocations at the moment. Simply count how many religiously strong young boys in the age of 20 we have in our parishes. Among those, more than 90% will choose to be doctors, lawyers and businessmen. What's left? So even if we assume the celibacy really plays the role here, this role is, to say the least, insignificant. And again, if I was too strong, please forgive me. I really don't want to offend anybody. It is good to speak openly about problems, or in the other words, to criticize. This is the only way how not to cover or brush aside problems. And I am open to this. But in this we have to be honest, and we have to put into light problems from both sides, right? Otherwise it is not fair. If somebody wants to criticize but gets offended when he is criticized, it is not right. In that case, his critics is not an attempt to solve a problem, it is an attack. Anyway, let me say once again, I am sorry if I didn't find proper words to show my points. After all, I am a foreigner, and I am a weak man. Sorry. Conclusion. I can call it a happy end, because I hope two big myths have been destroyed. And now, when we know where we stand, we can speak about finding proper solutions.